Ces personnes affirment avoir vu longuement et à plusieurs reprises
The Belgian sightings of the late 1980s and early 90s are some of the most widespread in history, with over 2,000 well-documented and researched reports by pilots, police, and military professionals.
I thought this is an intrusion of our airspace. We have to find out because it's an air defense issue.
The 18-month epidemic of UFO sightings rattles the Belgian government and brings the scientific community its most conclusive piece of UFO evidence to date.
I look at it and said, oh my God, that's too much. My feeling at the time, I must admit it was a fake.
This is the Belgian wave.
My name is Patrick Ferrin, and I was one of the two co-founders of SOBEPS, which is a non-profit association devoted to the study of aerial space phenomenon. In 1989, the situation was very quiet here in Belgium concerning UFOs. So quiet that we decided to close the association because there was no sighting anymore. And all of a sudden, strange things started to happen in the area of Eupen. And this was, historically speaking, the beginning of the Belgian UFO wave.
My name is Albert Kreutz. On the evening of November 29th, 1989, I was the dispatcher at the Eupen police station.
At around 5:30 p.m., a team of police officers informed Kreutz of an object flying over a nearby field and reportedly lighting it up like a soccer stadium.
I joked with them, since it was the end of November, that it was St. Nicholas coming down. Then they screamed, "Look out your top floor window, and you'll see it." I go to the window, and I see the object about 200 or 300 meters in front of me, like a boat, floating in the sky. It was magnificent to see, and it made me think that we are not alone on this earth, in the universe. I found it beautiful.
Immediately, the dispatcher is flooded with calls from concerned citizens. So he orders local officers stationed nearby to follow the object. One of these is Dieter Plumens, Chief Inspector of the Kelmis Police Force. Plumens is on duty with his partner, catching drug dealers near the Netherlands border, when the call comes in.
When we heard the call on the radio, we were driving in this direction. We saw a light or some type of object resting over the town of Henri-Chapelle. And we asked ourselves, what is that?
I told them to pursue the object and observe it. So they followed it to Henri-Chapelle, where the object hovered motionless over the Beloy retirement home.
I think this is pretty much the exact spot where we stopped at the time. We saw a huge object above us with round lights on 3 corners. And at some point, a much smaller object flew out from behind. And it had a reddish blinking light that blinked in rhythm with the larger light.
Plumans and his partner observe the objects for several minutes, and then suddenly the red orb is reeled back into the larger craft.
Das Objekt.
The object then rose up and flew away.
Kreutz and Pluman's accounts are among the many that began to flood in that night. In all, a total of 13 police officers called in reports of an unidentified triangular craft spotted in 8 different locations around Eupen. Over 60 additional civilian reports are made that evening, producing a concentrated mass of sightings that would soon bring international media attention and compel the Belgian government to respond.
It was really an historic night because the sighting reports were all so similar. But the big surprise was that this was only the beginning.
Des personnes affirment avoir vu longuement et à plusieurs reprises des objets volants et lumineux de forme triangulaire.
Ils ont vu dans le ciel un phénomène étrange, un ovni.
The day after November 29, it was a huge covering in the media.
Résultat des interactions entre les forces cosmiques.
It was on TV, it was in the newspaper, everywhere. And immediately we took our car and we went to Eupen to interview the people who saw it.
Mon mari a vu quelque chose de tout à fait incroyable la nuit de lundi. Et il a vu un objet énorme avec d'immenses rayons lumineux qui l'a suivi pendant plusieurs minutes alors qu'il rentrait à la maison. Voilà, il n'ose pas en parler parce qu'il a peur qu'on se moque de lui, mais moi, je tiens quand même à vous en informer.
We collected 150 different sightings from the same area, describing almost the same thing.
Donc ça forme un triangle. Un triangle? Un triangle. Oui.
A huge, triangular, dark object.
Avec chaque extrémité, un grand feu blanc.
C'est vraiment comme des phares d'atterrissage d'un avion, mais beaucoup plus fort. Parce que ça vient déjà souvent.
Et au milieu de celui-ci, un gros clignotant rouge.
What was very interesting is that triangular object wasn't reported at the time in 1989. At the time, in ufology, people were speaking about flying saucers, discs, something like that, but not a triangular, dark-shaped object. This was new.
The Belgian sightings of November 29th garner international attention, prompting an immediate response from the government. A point man is assigned to head up the government inquiry. Major General Wilfried de Brouwer, head of operations for the Belgian Air Staff.
In 1989, I was in charge of protection of the airspace of the country when a total of 143 sightings were reported in the area of Eupen. When receiving such report at military level, a lot of officers will reject it because it's not in their terms of reference. It's frustrating. It's frustrating having to declare that you don't know what is going on. So when it came to my office, I wanted to react in the same way. But I thought this is an intrusion of our airspace. We are the country hosting NATO. We have to find out because it's an air defense issue.
De Brouwer's first action is to contact the U.S. Embassy to find out if any stealth flights had taken place in the area without warning them.
Now, they came back very quickly and confirmed formally that no such flights had taken place over Belgium. So that wiped out that theory.
But the sightings continue, including many cases where several people were involved in a single sighting. Police officers, military and government personnel, and an Air Force weather forecaster.
Highly credible witnesses, all of them convinced that they saw something exceptional.
One of the cases that most intrigues de Brouwer occurs just 2 weeks after the initial sightings, when several witnesses report a triangular-shaped craft near the rural town of Ernage. De Brouwer is particularly struck by the account of Colonel André Amand, a civil engineer who is also director of infrastructure for the Belgian army.
Je quittais la maison.
I was driving from my house, my wife by my side, to go pick up my son at the Gembloux train station. I noticed 3 yellow panels moving parallel with me beside the road. Under them was a pulsating red light.
Je comprenais pas du tout.
I did not understand what it was. My wife said it's probably just a plane. But I wanted to see it, so I slowed down. And the object stayed with my car. So I accelerated and slowed down 2 or 3 more times. And every time the UFO would catch up with me. Then the UFO traveled behind the Sarnège woods. So I turned left and stopped on a small hill in front of a farm. The UFO came out from behind the woods, over there. I saw a huge, bright white beacon come over until it was about 100 meters in front of us. You could hear traffic on the highway and a train going by about 1 kilometer away. But at no point could you hear any noise coming from this object only 100 meters in front of us. We observed it for 6 to 8 minutes. And then my wife says, "Andre, come on, get in the car. I don't like this." And at that point, the great white beacon retreats and it darts away to the southwest in about the time it takes to let out a breath. In my experience, that kind of acceleration requires a very large amount of energy that wouldn't be possible without materials that could superconduct at a low temperature.
Et actuellement, 20 ans après.
And today, 20 years later, I know one thing. There is no man-made object able to do what I saw that object do that day. Not then and still not now.
C'est pas possible.
It's impossible.
Colonel Amman sends a report to the Ministry of Defense and is one of the many military professionals who convinces the Belgian government action was necessary.
We decided to set up a procedure to launch, in the future, aircraft to try to identify these sightings, but on conditions. First of all, witnesses would report to the police. They would confirm the sighting, and then they would call a radar station which had the authority to scramble F-16s.
I am Yves Mielbergs. In 1990, I flew F-16s in the 350th Squadron in Belgium. We had heard about the wave of UFOs, particularly in the regions of Liège and Eupen.
On the evening of March 30th, 1990, Mielberg's unit is informed of a string of UFO sightings around the town of Louvain.
We immediately took off in formation, 2 F-16s flying east of Brussels. Our goal was to intercept or come as close as possible to the objects and try to identify it as best we could.
Maintenant, voyageons en direction sud, à une vitesse extraordinaire. Libre pour l'investigation. Contrôlez l'armement.
The speed at which the object was moving, the large variations in altitude and course were particularly unique. In air combat, we're used to seeing objects move very quickly. But in this case, the object's variations were unforeseen, which proved that we were dealing with an object very different from an aircraft.
Contact.
Voilà, ici vous voyez le vecteur de l'objectif 300 degrés, vitesse 999. Vitesse normale? Bon, la vitesse d'un avion normal à cette altitude est l'ordre de 350-400 nœuds. Ça, c'est l'horizon.
Under pressure from a hungry press and public, de Brouwer holds a press conference to discuss Mielberg's flight.
Voilà, ça c'est une vitesse de 1010 nœuds. Donc ça, c'est la vitesse maximale qu'on a enregistrée. The F-16s registered objects that were flying at a normal speed, but suddenly turning and accelerating to speeds which were much higher than the speed of sound. Now, this cannot be done by any conventional aircraft.
Donc, les accélérations ont passé de 150 à 500 nœuds dans une fraction de seconde.
Unfortunately, only one of the F-16 radar tapes provided sufficient information to analyze, which meant that we couldn't compare the tapes. To exclude electromagnetic interference, which is a reflection of an object, sometimes on the ground, that can go through the atmosphere and bounce back to the F-16 radar.
100% sûr que vraiment il y avait quelque chose. Ça c'est clair.
Due to the failure of the secondary radar recording, government officials cannot verify the pilot's account. But Mielbergs remains convinced.
Personally, I believe there was an object at that location that day. We had ground witnesses, radar stations, and airplanes. 3 different sources watching the same object at the same time in the same place. There was something in the air that night.
The individual sightings of the Belgian wave are remarkable and impressed de Brouwer and other investigators with their legitimacy.
But what they didn't have was something irrefutable, a piece of evidence that would bring this fully into the realm of science.
On a spring evening in a village not far from where it all began, this evidence would finally arrive, and the results would be more than they had imagined.
My feeling at the time, I must admit, it was a fake.
More than a year after the Belgian wave began, UFO reports continue to flood the office of SOBEP's co-founder, Patrick Ferrin.
For almost 18 months, we collected massive observations, and we met several hundred people. We collected something like 60 photographs of unidentified flying things, and almost the same amount of video film. But unfortunately, they're all very bad. All you can see is small dots of lights on a dark background. But we were lucky to find one good picture. And this picture was taken in the small village of Petit Rechin, which is not that far from Eupen.
The 4th of April 1990. At 10 o'clock in the evening, a girl was walking her dog in the garden, and she saw a very strange object. She came back in and told her boyfriend, "We have something strange here, can you come and have a look?" And he went out and he took his camera. He only had 2 pictures left, so he leaned against the wall, didn't move at all, and set an exposure time of about 1 to 2 seconds.
He took 2 pictures, and when he got his film developed, he saw that one of the 2 pictures was blank. There was nothing on it, so he threw it away. But the second one was interesting. He saw 3 lights and something reddish right in the middle, but that was all. I received the original at the time. I looked at it and said, "Oh my God, that's too much." My feeling at the time, I must admit, it was a fake. So I built a small model, and I tried to reproduce what was on the slides. And I immediately understood that it was not a model. So we decided to see someone who was an expert in digital analysis, someone who had the right tools to detect and to prove it was a fake or not.
The slide is put under an intensive year-long study by Professor Mark Ashewa, a nuclear physicist at the Royal Military Academy in Brussels.
Professor Ashewa's analysis of the blue component of the slide show that one side of the triangular object is perfectly in focus. but two other sides are blurred. This proves that there is an independent movement of the object. It was not a fake.
The slide is further analyzed by scientists around the world, including Professor André Marion, a nuclear physicist at the University of Paris-Sud.
Professor Marion discovered that there was a magnetic field around that object, because he observed a pattern like iron filings behave in a magnetic field.
Professor Marion's findings trigger speculation that the craft may have moved using a magnetoplasma dynamic propulsion system, an electrically powered engine that uses a magnetic field to generate thrust. Such a system could also account for the lack of wind and noise reported by witnesses.
In the history of UFO study, the Petit Réchin photograph stands out as one of the most convincing pieces of evidence of a sighting to date. Not only does it reinforce thousands of reports from across Belgium, but it reveals many shared attributes of the most credible UFO cases.
It is a triangular craft that moves silently and accelerates instantly to unknown speeds.
And what's interesting about the Belgian sightings is that we in the UK had a very similar wave of sightings 3 years afterwards. Many of the witnesses talk about a large triangular-shaped UFO with 3 lights on the underside of the craft and a larger, slightly dimmer light in the center. So it's clear that in both cases, governments are looking at this and are coming to the conclusion that we are dealing with a real phenomenon.
The Belgian wave is remarkable not just for the sheer number of sightings, over 2,000, but for how well they were reported and officially investigated.
It lasted for almost 18 months, and all of a sudden, everything stopped.
Of the 2,000 reported cases, 650 were investigated, and out of the 650, 500 remain unexplained. The question remains open, what is it? And I don't know the answer, that's for sure. I can only say what it was not. It was no aircraft, no helicopter, no blimp, no Zeppelin, no ULM, no RPV, you just name it.
The Belgian wave remains a mystery. And even now, 20 years later, witnesses are left with more questions than answers.
I'm frustrated because after 20 years, no one has a valid explanation.
Indeed, there were 2 objects in the sky. We have no other explanation.
I had never seen such a flying object before that day or since then. And to this day, I still don't know what it was. Is it something extraterrestrial? Could be. I can only say what I saw.